Hello guys, welcome to another video, and in this one I wanted to do a bit of an update on my Grenade Titan build, as I know many of you have been waiting for an update on that, and apologies that it hasn't come sooner, but you know, with all of the Christmas goings on, it's really busy this time of year, but this is the video on that. So it's been a little while since I've done the last update on this build, and I wanted to kind of go through all of the changes that have happened with the build, and there's been a lot of changes, especially since I've leveled up quite a bit, and I've improved the build quite a lot as well. So, let's begin with the most important change that's happened since the last video. And that is that I'm now using Radiant Grief. Now, I'm playing solo Self-Found, and if I was playing Trade, I would have always had this item for this build, because it just enables Gas Grenade as a main ability like nothing else. And so, Radiant Grief is a unique item that makes it so that enemies in your presence are ignited. Now, it doesn't do much damage at all, it's only a 100 base damage ignite. But the ignite is there, so they're all ignited around you in a very large radius, and that means that your gas grenade instantly explodes. So whenever you drop gas grenade on the ground, that means that it's instantly exploding as soon as an ignited enemy walks into that gas cloud. So we're using gas grenade now as our main ability, and you can see here, this is the explosion damage here, and it's dealing a lot of damage. It's actually more damage as like a base damage explosion than explosive grenades were, and it's better as well because it goes off faster. So you can see here on the explosion, right now this is a level 24 gem, because we have a lot of extra gem levels coming in there. 569% base damage there for each explosion, and it's 100% conversion into fire as well. And one thing that I will say right here, whilst I got the skills screen open before I kind of go back to the other stuff, is that I've been really unlucky on getting not just Jeweler's Orbs, but also getting a good corruption. So I spent about 30 lesser Jeweler's Orbs and 30 Val Orbs trying to get +1 socket or even +1 gem level, and I just didn't get it. I believe that's incredibly unlucky from what I've kind of gathered from other people's corruption efforts on gems. I think that's extremely unlucky, but that's what happened. And I also haven't dropped the Greater Jeweler's Orb either, so I'm currently still on 4 links right now. But the build has been able to progress all the way into endgame maps. I'm in tier 15s right now. I've managed to kind of do all of the stuff that I wanted to do since the last build update. I've got my final Ascension, for example. And the build's feeling just fine in tier 15, so even without that extra link there of damage, the build is feeling pretty good. So, what else is going on in the build since the last update? Well, one of the other really big changes, aside from Radiant Grief and the switch to gas grenades being the main ability there, is that we now got a really big weapon upgrade. So, here's my old weapon for comparison here. Now, between these two weapons, you can see that in terms of damage, they're around the same in terms of base damage. This one is a bit higher. It has a much higher lower end. The top end there is roughly very similar. And the flat fire damage compared to flat fizz damage in this build is not really... There's no difference there between the two. But there is a really, really big difference between these two weapons. Firstly, on this new weapon, we're getting an extra grenade from the implicit. So, grenade skills fire an extra projectile. That's bringing up our total projectiles for gas grenade up to 5. So we're getting 1 extra from this weapon here, another extra from the tree, and then we're getting 2 from scatter shot as well. So that's a huge upgrade, especially when we're bossing, we're getting all 5 overlaps, and that's a giant damage upgrade in and of itself. But to go with that, this weapon also has +6 level of all projectile skills, whereas the old weapon had +2. Now, this is a huge strain on mana cost, but I'll be explaining in a moment how I've managed to solve mana cost in this build in a really big way, and it's really nice now. But just +6 to the level of all projectile skills is a crazy damage difference. I can actually show that right here. So, as I said, with the current setup, with the explosion, it's going to be dealing 569% of weapon damage per explosion. So, per gas cloud that comes off these grenades, that's how much damage it does. If we switch this weapon in here and we check that the gem level is now at level 20, you can see that the explosion is down to 468%. So we're basically getting an extra 100% of weapon damage coming in just from those gem levels. So that's a really huge upgrade in and of itself. And once I had changed around my passive tree to fit this weapon in, because I did have to allocate some nodes just to be able to use this weapon because of the massive increase in mana cost, overall, this weapon came out at a 73% more damage for the build. So that was a really, really big change. In terms of, like, on a per grenade basis, it was about a 20% more damage, but with all of the overlaps going on a boss, it's about 73% more damage. So that was a huge improvement for the build, and that is a really, really nice change there. So in terms of the rest of the gear, everything is pretty much improved. If you remember, I had really bad gloves last time. These are not that great, but they're really, really helping to solve our resistances. They also provide some much-needed dexterity as well. And, you know, life and mana is good. And then one of the really huge upgrades is that we now have 30% move speed boost. You'll remember that I had 15% in the last video, which was terrible. And these boosts are actually really nice. The less freeze duration there, or I should say the reduced freeze duration, is nice. Bit of resistance there, but mostly the 30% move speed is just a massive improvement. Of course, we already mentioned Radiant Grief replacing our old helmet, which was actually one of the better pieces of gear we had in the build, so sadly we had to replace a decent helmet. But this is more than worth it. This unique kind of makes the playstyle so much better for the build. And then we've got a really nice ring here with a bunch of stats that we really like. We've got evasion rating there, which we're converting to armor because we're using iron reflex, so I'll discuss that in a moment. Bunch of life and mana, some lightning res. This ring overall is a 70% to elemental resistance ring in total, which is just huge. And there's also mana regen there as well, which is really, really good. And this other ring is a bit weird. I kind of wanted to mention this one because I'll discuss it a little bit. I don't want to go too deep into it. I know that it's a heavy topic right now, but this has 57% increased rarity of items found. I'm not a huge fan of rarity stat in Path of Exile 2. I actually think that it's handled okay in PoE1, especially after they removed the item quantity stuff. But in PoE2, rarity also affects currency. So it's in a really weird place at the moment. You just get a giant multiplier on the amount of currency you're getting if you stack up a bunch of rarity. So I'm just using this ring because it adds a huge amount of rarity. It also solves my intelligence stats, and, you know, it provides a bit of resistance there as well. So the other stats on this item are not particularly useful, but the rarity is just a huge chunk. Then we've got a belt upgrade there as well. Once again, solving resistances. Overall, you may remember that I didn't have a resistance cap on cold and lightning, and I have that now. In fact, all of my resistances are capped now except for chaos. Chaos, sadly, is still at 10%, and this build gets absolutely chunked by chaos damage in maps, so you have to be really careful whenever you come across chaos damage. And, I mean, obviously, if I was playing Trade League, I'd have much better chaos resistance, but sadly, I haven't been able to find any gear with good chaos resistance and other good mods with it. But that's something that I want to kind of improve if I progress the build further. Lastly, we've got the Cloak of Flame, which was, of course, there last time. But you may remember that I was discussing about kind of, you know, sticking with Cloak of Flame or swapping into an armor setup. And I've decided to go Cloak of Flame all the way, because I think this is actually a really good item. And I'll discuss that a little bit once we get onto the passive tree in a moment. And lastly, I'll just discuss this Radiant Grief corruption here. This is a +1 socket corruption, so I'm able to, you know, further solve resistances there. And I'm actually overcapped on both lightning and cold, which is elemental weakness cap there. So even when I have elemental weakness on me, these are both still capped out, which is really, really nice. Whereas fire is unfortunately right on the cap there, right at the max res cap at 83. So elemental weakness for this build right now is a bit dangerous because of that. So I'm trying to avoid that in maps, but you know what it's like in maps. Sometimes you just have to run mods that you don't want to. But that's kind of the gear there covered, and I think overall we've had massive improvements to gear. Next up, let's just cover the gems that I'm using in this build now. So as I mentioned, Gas Grenade is the main ability there. We're also using Oil Grenade. I deliberately haven't leveled this one up because all it does is improve the radius when you level up the gem levels. It doesn't improve the exposure or anything like that. And we're mainly using this as an exposure, but it's also really, really nice as kind of a debuff to slow enemies down. And we're also linking it with Encumbrance, just like we had last time. But additionally, we're using Maim instead of Blind. And I was using this a little bit almost immediately after the video last time I swapped to Maim, because this is benefiting from the Encumbrance extra slow there. So you just apply a massive slow to enemies whenever they get hit by this oil grenade on the floor. And that's just really, really nice. We're also using Flammability now, which is linked to Heightened Curse. Even at level 8, you know, this costs quite a lot of mana, but we're splitting some of that mana cost into life. And this skill on its own, just at level 8 with this Heightened Curse, provides minus 40% of fire res. That combined with our oil grenade is minus 66% of fire resistance, which is just ridiculous. It's so good for bossing. And we also have a guaranteed way to apply shocks and to keep shocks permanently, which I'll discuss in just a moment. But that's really good. We also have Ripwire there, which is still there. This is a bit of a throwaway skill. I discussed that last time. If I remember to put it down, it's useful. It provides some rage, some extra regen, but the actual totem itself doesn't do all that much. It deals a little bit of damage. It does some pinning bolts, which are not really doing too much, but it applies maim, but we're already maiming with our oil grenade. So this one is mostly for the auras that it provides. If I remember to use it, it's mostly just for bossing. Then in terms of the skills that we're reserving there with our spirit, we're still using Overwhelming Presence, which is linked to Vitality and Clarity to help our recovery of resources there. And War Banner is a new addition. You'll remember that I was using Time of Need. I wasn't really convinced that it was that good. I'm still of the opinion that Time of Need is not that great, unless you do some kind of shenanigans with less duration stacking and you're able to get Time of Need down to a very low interval between the procs, then it's quite good. But kind of on its own, I don't think it's that great. So we're using War Banner here, which is a banner which, you gain stacks of Valor as you kill enemies, and then you can place this whenever you come across like a tanky rare or a map boss or something like that. You can place this down, and, you just get a buff there, which is increased accuracy. We don't really need the increased accuracy because we're already hit capped there, unless we come up against an evasive monster. But also 6% more attack damage, which is then multiplied by the more aura effects per Valor. So this is a big damage boost there whenever we want to drop it down and deal a lot more damage. And lastly, we have our weapon swap, which has changed quite a bit. So before I was using Shield Charge and Leap Slam as mobility, and losing those from the build was a little bit disappointing because I did kind of like the extra added mobility there. But I believe this is more than worth it, because how this works is we're able to switch to Stormcaller Arrow and just shoot one arrow out at the boss and immediately switch back to our grenade setup. And this arrow basically plants an arrow in the target, and after 1.5 seconds it goes off and explodes. And when it explodes, it has 100% fizz converted to lightning, and it has 800% more chance to shock. On top of that, we've got Stormfire, which means that shocks from supported skills do not expire on ignited enemies, which is always because of Radiant Grief. The enemy always has Ignite on them no matter what, because they're always in our presence. So this shock never disappears on bossing. And then there's Overcharge, which is increasing the magnitude of shocks, but making them have less duration, which once again doesn't matter because they don't expire on ignited enemies. And lastly, we have Conduction there to provide another 100% more chance to shock, which is multiplicative with the 800% more. So there's just pretty much a guaranteed shock whenever this attack goes off. It's always going to shock, and once the shock's there, it doesn't go away. So that's really, really strong. On bosses, I'm regularly getting 35% shocks with this one arrow, and that is with this weapon. This weapon is absolutely terrible. It's just got some lightning damage on there. It's not particularly good, but I'm probably going to get a better bow at some point, but this is just a bow that I had. I've got some extra lightning damage here on the quiver, and also some extra gem levels there as well. So it works. It works, so it's fine, but I will be getting a better bow whenever it does drop, or whenever I'm able to craft one, so that it has more damage, so we can always guarantee those shocks. But as of right now, this is working to provide a good amount of shock on bosses. Okay, let's discuss the passive tree, beginning with our fourth Ascendancy option, which is Crushing Impacts. This is just really nice to be able to immediately move to a heavy stun as soon as enemies are primed for stun. And of course, I did consider Stone Skin if we were moving into an armor setup, but I've kind of decided that Cloak of Flame is the way to go for this build, and that's just what I'm doing. So this node wouldn't be doing anything for that build, which means Crushing Impacts is pretty much our only option, but it's a good option and it's a nice addition to this build. And then in terms of passive tree changes, so we're pathing through here instead of going straight down here. This is just providing some extra recovery, which is really nice. And over here, we're taking Price of Freedom. This is helping us solve our mana costs which obviously mana cost went up a huge amount when we got +6 on our weapon. But luckily, Titan is able to solve that really easily just by taking this wheel right here. And this is only an extra 2 pathing points to get here. These nodes are really effective. 9% of skill costs converted to life costs for each of these small nodes. And then 18% on the big, along with some reduced mana cost there for attacks. So this is a really nice wheel that helps us be able to use our gas grenade constantly without any problems. 89 mana and 81 life there. And we have pretty good recovery. As you can see here, we've got 93 life regen normally and 62 mana regen. So those stats are not a problem at all. Then pathing down here, we're grabbing Blade Catcher because we're speccing a little bit more into armor now. So I'll discuss that in just a moment, but with Titan's hulking form, this is providing a lot of increased armor here. And then we have Defend with 200% of armor against critical hits, which, in my opinion, this is one of the best notables on this side of the tree. It just means that, you basically have an effective double armor whenever you get critically hit for anything that armor can be applied to. And part of that is heat proofing, which we're actually anointing on our amulet. So 25% of armor also applies to fire damage taken from hits. Whenever we get hit by either a physical hit or a fire hit, which is a critical hit, obviously the physical damage is going to be mitigated normally by armor. But because we're using Cloak of Flame, 40% of physical damage is taken as fire damage, which means that this is essentially going to be 50% of armor applying to fire damage whenever it's a critical hit. So that is really, really nice, and this just helps further mitigate. This is a great combination along with Cloak of Flame if you're able to stack a decent amount of armor. And right now we have 3,000 armor, which is not a lot of armor, but once you're actually, shifting part of it away to be taken as another damage type, that means that you're lowering that portion of physical damage that's actually being taken as physical damage, so your armor then becomes more effective against that hit. And obviously we're able to massively mitigate the actual part that's taken as fire damage because it first has to go through our 83% resistance, and then it's mitigated further by 25% of our armor. So that's a really nice combination there. And then we're moving down here and pathing round the back path just to grab these small nodes here. 1% maximum fire resistance each, and then 1% to all maximum elemental resistances there. And over here, of course, we're still taking Unnatural Resilience. Now, I think ideally, in a later setup for this build, if I continue to progress this build, and if I get the right distilled emotions, I would like to path all the way through here, just grab these 2 nodes, and then take all of this wheel. Because these nodes are actually quite nice, 22% increased armor each. And that means that I'd then free up my Anoint, and I could then anoint Catalysis, which is something that I'd like to take later on. This is just really nice to further mitigate physical damage, provide a little bit of damage, and that's just going to be really nice in combination with Cloak of Flame. Now over on the middle side of the tree, the sort of grenade area of the tree over here, we're taking some extra armor nodes here, once again further scaling armor a bit more. We're taking these nodes here for a bit of regen. This is actually really nice for 2 points. This is, over 1% life regen coming in there. Some flask life recovery rate as well. Really nice for 2 points. We're grabbing these 3 nodes here, which is a bunch of extra damage. It means that whenever we get that boss into sort of, finishing range, and we're able to deal a bunch of extra damage there to kill them faster, which is really nice. And then further down the tree, a little bit of a change here. We're no longer taking volatile grenades, which is, 25% reduced grenade fuse duration. I actually found that oil grenades are fine. They don't really take that long to go off. So you can see they're not too bad. As soon as they go off, if there's an enemy that's ignited, they just instantly all explode. So I didn't find that to be too bad, so I'm no longer taking that. And then further down here, the only change at the bottom of the tree here is that we're taking Iron Reflexes. And at the moment we're taking Iron Reflexes because we have some evasion gear. We have bit of evasion coming from Radiant Grief and a little bit here coming from the boots as well. And that's pretty much it. I mean, at some point we're going to have full armor boots, and at that stage it may not be even worth spending this 1 point here. It might just be worth, grabbing another increased armor node. But for now, this is providing a decent amount of armor for our build. In terms of what else I want to do on the passive tree, one thing that I will look into, which I haven't done just yet, is incorporating some of these weapon skill points in for our, our weapon swap tech. So as I explained earlier, we're using, the bow swap to be able to permanently shock bosses whenever we're doing a boss. And I think what I would do is use our weapon swap to actually, further guarantee that shock on larger bosses, on, stronger bosses. And to do that, I would basically spec out of some of the grenade stuff, like anything that only affects grenades, I would actually unspec out of that in the bow set, and then keep that on the grenade setup. And then whenever we switch to our bow, we probably come in here and grab these like increased lightning damage nodes. There's lightning damage with non-critical hits. It's lucky, which is going to be almost every hit that we do with the bow is going to be a non-crit. And then we can also like path through here, and there's some like penetration here. Increased chance to shock is going to be, more chance to shock, and we can carry on pathing all the way up here with even more increased chance to shock. There's some extra damage here. So that's what I would do if I want to incorporate some weapon swap tech, just to guarantee that shock on big bosses. But for now, it's basically working most of the time anyway, and I'm bound to get a better bow soon, so that's going to be just fine, I think. But yeah, overall, that's pretty much the update to the build. That's what's going on. I'm currently level 88. And as I said, mapping's been fine. I've been doing, tier 15s, tier 14s, and it's mostly been fine. I haven't found any strongholds yet, but it's been pretty fun doing maps on this build. One thing I will say is that the build it feels pretty squishy. Like, you do have to do a lot of dodge rolling to kind of get out of the way of things. It's not like a sort of meaty bruiser class with a shield up all the time and blocking lots of hits and things like that. I do feel like I'm very squishy once I actually start taking hits, but I also kind of get the impression that is most builds that are not scaling ES at the moment. There is a bit of an issue going on with, with defenses in the game right now that I think GGG are going to have to clear up at some point. But build is still fun, and as I said, it's performing quite well considering I still don't have a 5-link, my weapon isn't the greatest, and overall I'm pretty happy with how it's progressing. So that's pretty much it. That's the update for the build, and there should be some footage rolling in the background, but thanks for watching the video, guys. I hope you guys are enjoying Path of Exile 2, whatever you're getting on with. I hope you guys have a great Christmas. Merry Christmas to everybody watching this, and thanks for watching. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.
There can be no escape. The sands of time wait for no one. You possess a modicum of skill. Wither into nothing. Memories made real. This only ends one way.
I'm not ready.
You are not in control. Eternity awaits you. This is not the future I had foreseen.